The scent of frozen pine and old snow hung over the crescent moon pack village. Winter was more than a season. It was a hostile force that embraced the mountainous valley in an icy grip, reinforcing the harshness of life and the rigid social hierarchy. The village architecture was robust and austere, with dark wooden and rough stone cabins nestled on the mountainside, all visually converging toward the imposing Alpha House, built with lighter, polished stones in the center, a cold monument to authority. The few oil lamps that resisted the twilight cast long, distorted shadows, turning every corner into a potential danger for anyone who dared to wander after curfew. The wind howled, not unlike the wolves, and the feeling of isolation was oppressive, a reflection of the emotional rigor imposed by the community. Lyra 23 moved through the back alleys with the stealth of a trained mouse, a thin, virtually invisible figure under a threadbare wool shawl that barely protected her from the wool, circ. C. Temperature. She was officially an unskilled server, a shadow responsible for cleaning and the most humble tasks in the Alpha House, but her true status was that of the rejected Omega, the lowest and most stigmatized social position. Her pale skin and lifeless light brown hair made her look almost ethereal under the dim light, an absence rather than a presence. Her amber-colored eyes, however, were the only point of vibrant color on her face, but they were always cast down. Sweeping the floor, slightly bloodshot from constant sleep deprivation and fear, Lyra carried a heavy canvas bag containing damp firewood and old tools, each step an effort, a burden that was not just physical, but the accumulation of a whole year of rejection. 12 months ago, the Pax Beta, who was her promised mate, had publicly repudiated her at the mating ceremony, choosing a beta of a stronger lineage. The act had branded Lyra with the seal of uselessness, a dishonor the Pack made her feel daily through scornful glances and cruel whispers, emptying her of any sense of self-worth. Her body was hunched over by the tension, a defensive posture that protected her from further attacks, but also made her smaller, easier to ignore. Their current alpha, Droned 50, a bulky man of excessive power and implicit arrogance in every gesture, had ordered her to go to the abandoned warehouse on the village outskirts to collect insignificant supplies, scraps of fabric and some rusty tools he wouldn't deign to touch. The order was more of punishment than a task, forcing her to walk in the coldest and most dangerous hours of the night, reinforcing her place as the most expendable piece of the pack. Lyra accepted, as survival, even if it was a life empty and marked by pain, was the only purpose she had left. She possessed an inner strength of silent resistance, a fierce desire not to be expelled to die in the cold, but that desire was buried under layers of fear and servitude. She approached the Forbidden Zone, the stretch of forest leading to the legendary and avoided Serpent's Cave, a place tradition forbade as a gateway to danger. Lyra hesitated. The warehouse was nearby, but the path passed very close to the cave entrance, and the air there felt denser, almost sucking. She felt a chill that wasn't just the cold. The Lupin tradition was cruel, but it was the only law she knew, and violating it was a guaranteed death sentence. However, she needed those scraps for the Alpha House. Otherwise, a lashing and days without food awaited her. The fear of failing the immediate task was greater than the fear of the cave's legend. Lyra hurried. The warehouse was a ruined shack, dimly lit by a lantern hanging from a beam, and the interior smelled of mold and old metal. As she rummaged through the corners, looking for the disposable items, a faint and unexpected sound broke the night's stillness. It was not the howling of the wind, nor the creaking of wood, but a muffled, hoarse, and painful sound, coming from the direction of the Serpent's Cave. Lyra's heart leaped in her chest, a trapped bird beating against her ribcage. She stopped breathing, tensing every muscle, trying to distinguish the sound. Reason screamed at her to flee, to complete her task and return to the safe anonymity of the Alpha House. Sick or injured wolves were left behind. That was Thorn's unwritten rule. However, the sound repeated, sharper, unmistakable. It was a human voice, or rather, the sound of pain from someone who could no longer maintain their wolf form due to exhaustion. Empathy, the trait the pack considered a weakness and that Lyra had suppressed for years to survive, began to bubble up beneath the surface of her fear. She recalled her own helplessness on the day of rejection, the pain of being seen as less than nothing. Lyra dropped the bag, and the sound of the tools hitting the dirt floor seemed deafening in the night's silence. She picked up the lantern, and, in an impulsive act that defied all her survival programming, followed the direction of the moan, crossing the invisible line that marked the forbidden territory. The air grew even colder. The trees thickened, and the darkness was almost absolute, save for the weak beam of light. Her posture, previously hunched, became slightly straighter, driven not by courage, but by an irrational urgency she could not control. She reached the entrance of the Serpent's Cave. It was not a gaping mouth in the rock, but a narrow, deep fissure, partially hidden by frozen holly bushes. Lyra hesitated once more, her hands trembling, but the smell emanating from the fissure was unmistakable. The metallic, heavy and thick smell of clotted blood mixed with earth and fever. She pushed her thin body into the fissure, crushing her coat against the icy stones, and the world turned into a damp, tight darkness. The lantern then revealed the scene. They were there. 12 young and teenage wolves, some barely, holding human form, others reduced to wolf form, all huddled in a damp and dirty corner of the outer chamber. Their bodies were covered in deep cuts, frostbite, and poorly closed wounds. The result of a recent incursion or accident Lyra knew had happened on the border. Alpha Thorn had called off the searches 3 days earlier, declaring them lost to the pack, an unrecoverable burden he would not spend more resources to save. They were 2 young, secondary lineage betas, easily disposable in the utilitarian view of the cruel leadership. The young wolves were motionless, except for sporadic tremors and faint moans that Lyra now identified as pleas for relief. Silent despair was etched on their pale faces, on their cracked lips, and in their half-closed eyes of fever and exhaustion. Lyra felt fear mixed with the nausea of injustice and sadness. The pack's cruelty, which she felt in her own body daily, was exposed there in the form of 12 abandoned adolescents. She was an Omega. They were future warriors, but in that moment, they were all rejected by the same unforgiving system. One of them, the youngest 16, his face covered in soot and dried blood, slowly lifted his head. It was Gabriel, a beta Lyra barely knew from seeing him a few times in the Alpha House corridors, whose green eyes, now murky and full of pain, met hers. Lyra swallowed air, expecting a reaction of revulsion or authority, even in weakness, that would reinforce the hierarchy. However, the young beta merely recognized her, not for her servant status, but as the only hope that had manifested in that icy hole. Gabriel tried to speak, his throat dry, his voice coming out as a scraped, almost inaudible whisper, but charged with a plea not for rescue or for a shaman's magical cure, but for the most basic necessity of life. Lyra ... water ... double quotes. He didn't ask to be saved, nor for a miracle, just a drop of relief for his burning mouth. It's the word, her name, coming from someone the pack considered superior, shattered Lyra's mask of servitude like a shard of glass cutting the skin. The trauma of rejection had made her accept that she was useless. The request for usefulness was an electric shock. In that instant, the cold rage at the pack's cruelty, the same that had cast her into marginalization, manifested in Lyra's soul. She could see in her own eyes, reflected in Gabriel's gaze, the same pain of being considered a burden, dead weight. The request was not a command, but a plea from equal to equal. In misery, overwhelming compassion, which she had tried to bury, exploded in her chest. A warm, protective force that overshadowed the paralyzing fear. She might have failed at being a mate, a strong beta, but she would not fail at being a human being, or, in this case, a Lupin being, in the face of immense pain. Gabriel's plea for water, the simple necessity, was the key that unlocked Lyra's emotional cage. She looked at the 12 bodies, all on the brink of death, and felt the depth of her own abandonment. If she left them there, she would be ratifying the cruelty that had destroyed her. Lyra, who had always felt useless, was now the only person who cared, and the weight of that responsibility was, strangely, liberating. Gabriel's look of supplication was a mirror to her own pain. "I won't leave," Lyra whispered to herself, her voice firm and unrecognizable even to her own ears. It was a promise and a challenge to the pack that had rejected her. If she was expelled and died in the cold, it would not be by omission but because she had chosen compassion. She took off her shawl, the only comfort she possessed, and gently placed it over the nearest body, a small Omega girl who was trembling uncontrollably. It was a small gesture, but the fleeting warmth of the fabric seemed to reignite a spark. The flame of her determination was lit. Lyra stood up, her amber eyes now fixed, not on the ground, but on the dark interior of the cave. Her mind, trained in years of forced discretion, began to work with the cold precision of a strategist. She needed water, blankets, and above all, silence to keep her secret. The first step was taken. She turned and left the serpent's cave, no longer an invisible servant, but a person with an urgent and dangerous purpose. The frozen air no longer felt so oppressive. Fear had been replaced by adrenaline. The contrast between her sudden emotional richness and her material poverty was sharp. She possessed zero resources, but the most valuable capital, the urgent need of 12 lives. Lyra was the Omega the pack had discarded, yet, ironically, the only one willing to risk everything for it. The tragedy of the situation was clear. The future of the pack lay in the hands of its social refuse. She ran back to the warehouse, now not to retrieve the scraps for Thorn, but to find something she could use as a container for the water. Lyra's pain is what's driving her. Willpower is often born in the deepest abandonment. If you're feeling this connection to our story, consider subscribing so you don't miss the continuation. And leave a comment telling us where you are watching this awakening of courage from. Lyra returned to the village, her mind buzzing, avoiding the shadows where guards might be. She needed clean water, and the main well of the Alpha House was the only safe place, but it was also the most watched. She used her intimate knowledge of the guard, change times, and patrol routes, acquired over months of subordinate and invisible service, to sneak in. Her familiarity with the back of the kitchen and the laundry room, places where Omegas were allowed, was now her greatest advantage, a superpower of social camouflage. She managed to fill an old, rusty bucket she used to clean the stables, feeling the icy water splash on her hands and anxiety gnawing at her stomach. The weight of the water, on that journey back to the cave, was overwhelming, but she bore it with a determination she had never channeled into her own life. She was no longer running away from rejection, she was running toward a purpose. Arriving back at the cave, Lyra saw that Gabriel was awake, watching her with a silent intensity, while the others still thrashed in a feverish, restless sleep. The first thing she did was offer him the bucket. Gabriel drank with the desperate eagerness of someone who believed that would be the last sip of life, and Lyra watched, her throat tight with emotion. The act of drinking, such primary relief, seemed to reinvigorate him not just physically, but emotionally. Lyra wiped his face with the edge of the shawl, and the caring touch was something she hadn't received or given in a long time. The silence that followed was not one of fear, but of a mutual understanding of their situation. Lyra sat down, tired but determined, beside him. The night was long, but the fate of 12 lives and the meaning of her own had changed forever. Lyra's past was a sequence of cold renunciations and forced acceptance, from the loss of her parents, an Omega couple who succumbed to a blizzard during a supply run, to her current status of servitude. Early orphanhood, at age 10, meant her immediate integration into the caste system of the Alpha House, where she quickly learned that survival was conditional on her insignificance and obedience. Lyra's greatest trauma was not the hard labor, but the constant annulment of her identity. She grew up under the strict watch of the Alpha House matriarch, who taught her that empathy was a luxury Omegas couldn't afford, and that any display of feeling would be cruelly exploited. Thus, Lyra became a master of discretion, moving through kitchens and corridors like a ghost, observing, but never being observed, assimilating the cruelty and indifference of the powerful, which fueled an internal, cold, and controlled fury. The public humiliation that sealed her fate occurred a year ago in the Great Hall during the solstice. Lyra, promised to Beta Harold 24, who saw in her a low-risk, zero-ambition partner to maintain his authority, was abruptly discarded. At the mating altar, Harold, blinded by the desire for social ascent and influenced by a beta female of richer lineage, pushed her aside, declaring her a stain on the pack's future. Weak and unfit to breed strength. His words, spoken with public scorn before the entire community, pierced Lyra more deeply than any lash. The pain was not just the loss of a mate, but the confirmation that her entire existence was seen as a failure. Lyra accepted the verdict with her head bowed. Her hunched posture became permanent, a defense mechanism against new attacks and a signal to the pack that she had accepted her label of trash. Her inner strength of resistance, however, deepened under the weight of rejection, silently determined not to die in the cold. Now, in the cold dampness of the Serpent's Cave, Lyra was rewriting her purpose. Her first act of rebellion was to transform that stone hole, a place of abandonment and curse, into a sanctuary of healing. The work was exhausting and secret, requiring her to use her mastery of discretion to bypass the Alpha House's surveillance system. She used the dirty rags of her work as a disguise, and the coldest hour of dawn as her moment of action. She stole not out of greed, but out of extreme necessity. Every step, every whisper, every shadow became a potential threat, but Lyra was focused. Her knowledge of herbs, a hidden treasure she had acquired from the old shaman Arita, a marginalized healer living in the mountains, was her only real resource. Lyra, under the pretense of collecting firewood in the forest, visited Arita sporadically, not out of sickness, but out of a silent desire for useful knowledge. Now, that knowledge was the difference between life and death for the 12 young and teenage wolves. She mixed willow bark to relieve burning fever, crushed peppermint leaves to aid congested breathing, and prepared bitter infusions to combat the infection already threatening Gabriel's life. The most urgent and dangerous task was the transfer of the injured. The young wolves were in the outer chamber, too exposed to cold and detection. Lyra mobilized the 4 least injured wolves, using her calm but firm voice to organize the operation. They moved in the darkness, dragging and carrying their companions' heavy bodies to a deeper, drier, and hidden underground chamber, about 100 meters from the entrance. The effort demanded all of Lyra's energy and the young wolves, and the fear of a collapse or being heard was constant. But their unity under Lyra's silent leadership overcame the physical obstacle. The new chamber, though cold and dark, was dry and hidden, a true sanctuary. Lyra lined the stone floor with stolen hay from the Alpha's stable, hidden under piles of old straw on the village periphery. She used blankets taken from the Alpha House laundry, items she knew would only be noticed days later due to the servants' disorganization, to create rudimentary beds, prioritizing the most serious cases like Alara and Kai. With every stolen object, Lyra felt the tension growing in her chest, but the sight of the suffering young wolves silenced the voice of fear. The emotional bond that formed was deep and silent. Lyra did not speak much, her actions were her dialogue. She cleaned dried blood, changed foul bandages, and crucially, fed them with oatmeal and broth she stole from the servants' kitchen, hiding them in clay pots under her coat. The young wolves, ranging from 16 to 20 years old, no longer saw her as the inferior Omega, but as the only chance at life. Physical desperation transformed into silent, grateful loyalty. Gabriel, the young beta who had spoken first, was the most observant. He had a severe fracture in his leg, but his mind was intact. He watched Lyra as she worked, and his eyes expressed a mixture of shame for her, positioned, and admiration for her courage. One night, while Lyra applied a bitter infusion to fight an infection, Gabriel held her hand, the touch weak, but charged with intent. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, his voice still hoarse. Lyra paused, her amber eyes meeting his for the first time without fear. Lyra sat beside him, fatigue weighing on her body. She took a deep breath, and the answer came from a place of pure truth, a place she hadn't dared to access before. Because... the Alpha decided you are a burden. Trash. I know what it's like to be trash. She wasn't accusing them, but sharing her pain. She continued, her voice low, almost a whisper. You have a future, I don't. But if I can give you a future, your life won't be totally useless. The brutal honesty of her statement, her acceptance of her own annulment, deeply touched Gabriel. He squeezed her hand in response. The bond grew, sustained by need and mutual trust. The young wolves began to call her Lyra of Light. In a whisper, a title of honor that cruelly contradicted the rejected Omega label the pack gave her. She became the maternal and healing figure they needed, and in doing so, Lyra finally felt needed. So the act of caring was, for her, an act of self-healing. By nurturing life in them, she nurtured purpose in herself, confronting her trauma of abandonment with every bandage and every dose of bitter medicine. Her inner strength, previously just a whisper of determination, was now in full action. while Lyra devoted herself to healing in the cave. Alpha turning 50 intensified his search, but for purely political reasons. The disappearance of 12 young wolves, even if low-ranking, was a sign of weakness to neighboring packs, and he could not allow such a stain on his leadership. The searches were formal, with tracking dogs and guards patrolling the forest, but Thorn ordered them to avoid the Serpent's Cave, out of superstition and believing the young wolves would have died in an accident miles away. This disinterest behind the facade of concern was Lyra's greatest ally. However, the most dangerous external obstacle was Harold, the beta who had rejected her. He was restless. Harold, who now enjoyed his new position, noticed Lyra's absence during her nightly cleaning shifts and the lack of attention she normally paid him out of fear. He watched her from afar, suspicious, not understanding the reason for her new confidence and the slight change in her posture. Less hunched, more determined. He despised her, but the possessiveness he felt for her, even after the rejection, made him want to unmask whatever she was hiding. Tension dramatically increased in the second week. The cold became more intense, and infection, the worst internal enemy, began to spread. Two of the weakest wolves, a teenager named Elara and another young wolf named Kai, developed raging fevers. Lyra knew the herbal mixture she used was not strong enough. They needed real antibiotics. Supplies only available in the Alpha's locked, heavily guarded pantry and under the Beta's watch. This situation demanded an attitude Lyra never imagined taking, stealing directly from the heart of power. Lyra confronted her deepest internal fear, the fear of being seen and confronted. She fought against the internalized voice of the pack telling her she was stupid, Omega, and that she would fail, leading everyone to their death. She looked at Gabriel and the others, their eyes hopeful and trusting, and knew that failure was no longer an option. Invisibility had protected her for years, but now, to save Elara and Kai's lives, she needed to risk being seen, to be a threat. On a night of blizzard, Lyra executed her plan. She used her knowledge of the routines to divert the main guard from the pantry, intentionally creating a small fire in the laundry room, a place she knew the guard would quickly extinguish for fear of the Alpha's retaliation. While the momentary, controlled chaos unfolded, she sneaked through the side door using a hairpin turned into a hook to unlock the heavy lock. Fear was palpable, but urgency was greater. Inside the pantry, the smell of dried herbs and sterile metal flooded her senses. Lyra grabbed 3 vials of expensive antibiotics, a roll of medical-grade gauze, and a small surgical scalpel. All items marked as exclusive property of the elite. She could hear the guard returning, heavy, hasty footsteps approaching, and her body trembled, not from cold, but from adrenaline and controlled panic. She quickly hid under a pile of grain sacks, breath held as the guard checked the place. The guard shone his lantern exactly where Lyra was hiding. She closed her eyes, expecting the heavy hand on her shoulder, the accusation, the end. The guard swore about the smell of smoke and the mess, but failed to see Lyra's tiny, motionless volume. He locked the door, and Lyra waited 5 more minutes, body numb, before daring to move. She had succeeded, but the emotional toll was high. The fear had left her exhausted and sick. Back in the cave, tension peaked. Lyra had to perform a small drainage procedure on one of Kai's wounds, which was rapidly infecting. She used the scalpel, cleaned the wound, and applied the antibiotic for the first time, acting with an instinctive precision, guided by necessity and her empathy. Kai's pain was visible, but he clenched his teeth and tightly held Lyra's hand, trusting her completely. In that moment of pain and healing, the bond of trust between them cemented into something unbreakable. The healing began. Lyra spent her days in exhaustion, serving the Alpha House under Harold's suspicious gaze, and her nights in the danger and purpose of the cave. She was physically wasting away, her eyes more bloodshot than ever, but her soul was more robust. The success of her mission was evident in the faces of the 12 young wolves, who were now able to move and speak with more vigor. They were healed enough to survive, but not enough to be transported without risking exposure. The pack hadn't found them, but time was running out. Lyra knew she needed a final plan. They couldn't live hidden forever, depending on nightly thefts. The pack needed to know they were alive, but Alpha Thorn wouldn't allow 12 burdens back to stain his image of strong leadership. The conflict was no longer just about survival, it was ideological. Lyra needed to confront the system, not just subvert it. She felt like an invisible general leading a secret army of the rejected. The gradual increase in tension reached its climax when Harold finally caught her red-handed. He waited for her at the edge of the forest on the 4th week, just as she was returning from the cave before dawn, with the empty porridge pot. "Where were you, Omega?" His voice was a low growl of contempt and possessiveness. Lyra's heart stopped. She was cornered. Her years of discretion had failed at the most crucial moment, but she didn't. "Look down this time." Lyra maintained the erect posture she had gained in the cave. "I was finishing the warehouse cleaning, Beta Harold." Exactly as ordered. The lie was cold and convincing, but her gaze held a new audacity. Harold approached, smelling the faint scent of blood and herbs that Lyra desperately tried to cover with the smoke smell from her servitude clothes. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something more. Purpose. "You're plotting something." You never had that look of satisfaction. "Don't lie to me, Lyra. You know what happens to traitors." Alphathorn is not patient. Harold grabbed her arm. The beta's pressure on her skin was painful, a physical reminder of her subordination. Fear hit her like a wave, but Lyra didn't allow it to dominate her. "I'm not plotting anything, Beta," Lyra replied, pulling her arm away with unexpected strength, a gesture of insubordination that surprised Harold for a crucial second. "I am just a servile Omega. My only plan is to survive. If you have accusations, take me to the Alpha." She challenged him, knowing he wouldn't take her immediately, as he wanted the pleasure of unmasking her himself. Using her to gain points with the Alpha, Harold released her, his face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare challenge me. I will find out what you are hiding. And when I do, you will wish you had starved to death in the cold." He watched her walk away, and Lyra knew it was a matter of hours until he mobilized the guards to search the area. She needed to act, and she needed to act now, before the pack discovered her secret and executed both her and the 12 wolves she had saved. Upon entering the Alpha house, Lyra headed for the kitchen, but instead of grabbing her brooms, she headed for the main hall. Alphathorn was gathering the council for an emergency meeting, as the harsh winter demanded rationing plans. Lyra saw her opportunity. The risk was absurd, but the need was imperative. She had 12 lives under her responsibility and Harold's clock ticking. She took a deep breath, concentrating the silent strength she had discovered in the cave. Lyra, the rejected Omega who always bowed her head, was about to expose herself publicly, not out of pride, but out of unconditional love for a group of young wolves who had become her secret pack. The stage was set for the climax. She had to transform her invisibility into an undeniable revelation, exposing the brutal truth of Alphathorn's negligence. The great hall of the Alpha house was enveloped in a tense silence, broken only by the grave whispers of the senior council. Alphathorn 50, seated on the polished stone throne, presided over the rationing meeting. His expression heavy, focused on numbers and food reserves. The betas, all robust and well-fed, were spread out in a semicircle, discussing resource allocation with the coldness of those who saw survival as a zero-sum game. It was into this environment of concentrated power and material wealth that Lyra, dressed in her servitude clothes stained with hay and dirt, made her entrance. She didn't ask permission, just walked through the side kitchen doors and stopped in the center of the hall. A tiny, unexpected focal point, shocking everyone with her audacity. The reaction was immediate. Beta Harold, who had sneaked into the hall minutes earlier, breathless from his run through the forest, growled, rage contorting his face. "Guard, seize this insolent Omega. She has invaded a sacred meeting and must be punished." His voice echoed, laden with personal humiliation and desire for revenge. Alphathorn raised one hand, silencing Harold, not out of respect for Lyra, but for the pleasure of seeing the chaos unfold. He looked at Lyra, his eyes cold and bored, as if assessing a piece of trash that needed to be removed. Lyra, for the first time, did not look away, meeting the Alpha's coldness with the silent determination she had gained in the cave. Before Thorn could give the order, a grave and unexpected roar from the main door broke the tension. Ching Alpha Vitar 60, the supreme leader of the regional packs, a legendary man known for his ruthless justice and strategic wisdom, entered the hall. He was there to inspect the rationing situation of the Crescent Moon Pack, an event Thorn had tried to keep discreet. Alpha Thorn's surprise was palpable. He quickly stood up, bowing in submission. The King Alpha, imposing in his bearskin cloak and with a grizzled beard. That lent him an aura of authority, ignored Thorn, and swept the hall with his keen eyes, which stopped directly on Lyra in the center of the chaos, and then on Harold. What is happening here? King Alpha Vitor's voice was thunder, accustomed to imposing order. Harold, trying to compose himself, pointed an accusing finger at Lyra. Majesty. This Omega, this scum, is being unmasked as a traitor. She is hiding something. Allow me to punish her and uncover her secrets. He was desperate to regain his position. Lyra knew it was her decisive moment. She took a deep breath, and the fear disappeared, replaced by a crystalline clarity of purpose. Lyra took a step forward, ignoring Harold's low growl, and addressed the King Alpha directly, speaking loudly and firmly in the hall for the first time. I am not a traitor, Majesty. I am a protector. The secret I hide is not a threat, but proof of this leadership's negligence and cruelty. I hid the 12 young wolves that Alpha Thorn declared dead, and discarded, condemning them to the cold, for considering them a burden. The revelation, spoken in a single powerful statement, was a seismic shock that paralyzed the senior council. Thorn paled, his facade of authority crumbling under the direct accusation. Lyra continued, her voice choked with emotion but strong in conviction. They were not lost, Majesty. They were meters from here, in the Serpent's Cave, injured, bleeding, and fighting for their lives. This pack, which so values strength, abandoned them because it did not want to spend resources or risk its own comfort. I, the Omega they called trash, was the only one to care for them. I healed them, protected them, and kept them alive for 4 weeks. The silence was absolute, laden with guilt and shame. King Alpha Vitor remained motionless, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. He looked at Thorn, who was trying to stammer an excuse about search protocols. Then Vitor made a gesture with his hand, and an unexpected sound began to approach the hall's side door, the sound of 15 pairs of shuffling feet. Lyra had given her signal, and her pack was arriving. The door opened, and the 12 injured young wolves, now healed enough to walk, entered the hall, leaning on each other, but all looking directly at Lyra. They were no longer dirty and bleeding. They were pale and thin, but alive. The scene was devastating in its impact. The pack's future, saved by its rejected one. Gabriel, the youngest, with a bandaged leg, stepped forward. He limped and stood beside Lyra, protecting her. Majesty, Gabriel said, his voice weak but charged with dignity. This woman saved us. She stole, she risked her life, and she fought for us when everyone, including our Alpha, turned their backs on us. He looked up at the King Alpha, and his words were an undeniable testimony. Gabriel then looked at Lyra, and the transformative dialogue occurred. You taught us that true strength is not what attacks Lyra, it's what protects the weak. He turned to the pack and to Thorn. Alpha Thorn saw us as a burden. Lyra saw us as life worth saving. She is our protector, the only one who deserves to be called a leader. Lyra felt tears stream down, not from sadness, but from the acceptance of her strength. She lifted her head, and the fear was gone. She had accepted her destiny, not as an Omega, but as a leader. King Alpha Vitor stepped forward, stopping between Lyra and Thorn. His gaze was one of contempt for the local Alpha. The usefulness of a being is measured by their willingness to save, not by their status on a certificate. 12 lives were saved by whom you consider nothing. He turned to Thorn. You failed in your primary duty, to protect your pack. You traded lives for resources and reputation. You are deposed. The command was final, the sentence immediate. Thorn tried to protest, but the King Alpha ignored him. Vitor turned to Lyra, and silence fell again. He took her hand, stained with work and healing. Lyra of Light, he said, using the name her secret pack had given her. You have shown the greatest strength of all, compassion. Your sacrifice for 12 lives is proof that you have the most genuine spirit of royalty, the King Alpha declared. To the shock of the pack, I, King Alpha Vitor, declare Lyra the Luna of her own pack, the Pack of Light. And these 12 wolves are her first guardians of honor. Lyra felt the weight of the crown, not of gold, but of responsibility, settling on her shoulders. The bond was consolidated. The 12 wolves knelt beside her, a gesture of absolute loyalty. Harold watched, contempt turned into envy and fear. Lyra had overcome the trauma of rejection, not by being accepted, but by becoming undeniably necessary. Her pack was formed in sacrifice, and she was ready to lead. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. Underscore the acceptance. An unconditional loyalty of her new pack of 12 wolves, all young and strong, were the antidote to years of rejection. Lyra felt a surge of power that did not come from an inherited title, but from a conquered purpose. She looked at the King Alpha, gratitude in her eyes. The Crescent Moon pack was in shock, the brutal hierarchy undone by an act of kindness. The deposition of Thorn and the ascension of Lyra were not just a change in leadership, but a moral revolution for the Crescent Moon. Valley, King Alpha Vitor acted quickly and firmly. He publicly demoralized the senior council for their complicity and negligence and confiscated much of the Alpha House's surplus resources Thorn had selfishly accumulated while the pack suffered in the winter. The King Alpha gave Lyra and her 12 Guardians of Honor, the Pack of Light, a generous portion of these resources, and the promise of royal protection as they established their new home. Thorn's punishment was exile to the border posts, a life of hard work and isolation that he had condemned many others to. The concrete change in Lyra's life began immediately. She left the servitude clothes behind and, guided by King Alpha Vitor, began the righteous exodus. Lyra did not want to lead the old corrupt Crescent Moon pack. Her vision was to build a new future, based on the principles that had saved her: usefulness, compassion, and merit. She and her 12 guardians, led by Gabriel, who now walked with a supporting Cain but with a renewed spirit, migrated to a more fertile and protected area of the valley, known as Sunrise Hill, with the logistical support of the King Alpha. The name chosen for the new community reflected her new philosophy: the Pack of Light. Lyra's first action was to establish a new code of conduct, which valued sacrifice and loyalty above lineage. She used the donated resources and the help of her guardians to build more efficient cabins and a community infirmary, a direct reflection of the suffering they had shared in the Serpent's Cave. The 12 young wolves, healed physically and emotionally, dedicated themselves to Lyra with an unwavering loyalty, not as servants but as her advisors and the backbone of her new leadership. They became living examples that a wolf's worth was defined by their actions, not their social status. News of the founding of the Pack of Light spread like wildfire in the valley. Slowly, other rejected ones began to appear. Omegas tired of invisibility, weak betas who had been marginalized by Thorn's system, and even secondary beta families who felt neglected by the old hierarchy. Lyra welcomed them all with the same dignity and offered them a place to serve. She did not ask for brute strength, but for the will to contribute and compassion. In less than a year, the Pack of Light became a beacon of prosperity and justice. Where the Crescent Moon pack valued ostentation and coldness, Lyra's pack cultivated cooperation and empathy. Lyra, the former servant, transformed into a wise and beloved leader. Her physical appearance changed, the fear disappeared from her amber eyes, replaced by a calm confidence and a luminosity that radiated from within. Her posture was no longer hunched, but firm and erect, the symbol of her conquered royalty through sacrifice. Lyra's philosophy was simple: no one is useless, just misplaced. She ensured that every member, from the weakest to the strongest, had a valuable role in the community. She understood that the pack was stronger when everyone felt needed and protected. This sense of belonging was the emotional remedy that cured the trauma of rejection, both in them and in Lyra. She learned that true strength resided in the ability to nurture and protect the vulnerable, and not in empty titles or imposed force. The old Crescent Moon pack dwindled. Without Thorn's tyrannical yet competent leadership, and with the pack's morale destroyed, it became an example of moral and social decay. Many of its youngest and most promising inhabitants ended up migrating to the Pack of Light, seeking a place where merit and kindness were rewarded, not punished. Even Beta Harold, humiliated and powerless, was forced to step away, unable to survive in the authority vacuum he himself had created by rejecting Lyra. Lyra's family reconciliation came in an unexpected way. King Alpha Vitor formally adopted her as his protege and ally, guaranteeing her unquestionable status among the packs. This was not just an honor, but a permanent shield against any attempt at revenge from the old regime. Lyra, who had not had a family since childhood, found in Vitor the father figure of wisdom and support she needed. The moral of the story was clear in the resolution. The greatest power does not reside in imposed strength, but in the capacity to nurture and protect the rejected. Lyra, the discarded Omega, proved that true royalty is not inherited by blood, but conquered by sacrifice and compassion in the face of pain. The love and acceptance of her pack were worth more than any crown. Lyra never felt alone again. The sun shone upon the Pack of Light, a thriving community of well-built houses and full barns. Sunrise Hill was a vibrant contrast to the somber coldness of the old crescent moon. Lyra, 28, now not only Luna, but an undisputed and respected leader throughout the region, sat on a hilltop observing her pack's activity. She was not alone. Beside her was her mate, A, strong and kind beta from an allied pack, who respected her for her strength of spirit and not for her status. In her arms she held her daughter, a 2-year-old child with light brown hair and amber eyes identical to her own. The child smiled at the sun, oblivious to her mother's past pain. Lyra's 12 guardians of honor, now experienced and just leaders, were the pillars of the community. Gabrielle, fully healed, was her second in command, a beta with the wisdom of one who saw death and was saved by kindness. The final scene showed the cycle of acceptance being passed on to the next generation. In the village's central square, Lyra watched one of her guardians, young Kai, whom she had healed from infection, approach a new Omega. A newcomer who had moved from the old pack, still with the hunched posture and downcast eyes of fear. Kai showed no pity, but welcomed her. He extended his hand to the new Omega and invited her to join the building of a new barn, a simple act of usefulness and acceptance. Lyra smiled, the hopeful vision of the future reflected in her amber eyes. Fear had been replaced by certainty. She had transformed rejection into foundation. The Pack of Light thrived because it was built on the principle that no one should ever feel the pain of being discarded. The true royalty was the pack she had created, and love was priceless. Have you done an act of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment love is priceless if you also believe in human kindness.